All right. Closing out our day, Tim Gouleri from Sierra Ventures will be our moderator. He is a self-proclaimed old school investor. Tim believes that time, capital, experience, work ethic, connections, hustle, and wine are the keys to bringing Decacon organizations. He's been a successful entrepreneur, building 2 software infrastructure companies, one to IPO and the other to a $3.2 billion M&A. My favorite thing about Tim that I knew before was that he sold books door to door. But my favorite story from today is how he met Suresh. That apparently he was doing a photo share. It was from Peking to Paris, is that right? On a motorcycle?
No, in a 1928 Bentley, old car.
Cooler. 1928 Bentley is cooler than the motorcycle, I thought. And that Suresh and Benji showed up and it was like, yeah, we're doing something stealth. And as Tim describes it, he's like, that's like catnip for an investor.
I'm like, okay, now you have my attention.
So much for those cold calls. Paul Thomas is joining us from HP. Paul is leading this project as a VP of engineering to build the future of cloud-based work with the Workforce Experience platform. What I learned about Paul that I think is awesome is that he doesn't follow a script. So whatever is about to happen on stage has not been practiced. And even if it were, it wouldn't be what we anticipated. Tim and Paul, thank you for joining us.
Nor have I, no script.
Yeah, I just I take a moment as well. A big fan of Sedai. Worked with Roy Graf, as I know him, when I first started at HP, and he really held my hand and got me up to speed quickly. Don't do scripts. And I was invited to come to this conference. I was very excited to come. And I was telling Tim that then a meeting came in the calendar, and I met with Logan. And Logan's like, okay, what slot do you want to talk in? Now, fair warning, I get pretty terrified at speaking. It's not my thing. And I don't do scripts. And
you're doing really amazing so far.
Well, we were doing a video this morning, and Logan didn't like what I said. And he said, can we just tweak this a little bit? And I had to point out that, yeah, what was going to come out next would be completely different. So don't do guidance. But I really do appreciate being here. And I was talking to Tim because there isn't really a script. There are some preset questions, obviously, it goes without saying, right? But I wanted to emphasize both the value that we've been getting from Sedai, number one, through the tool set. I also wanted to emphasize that, unfortunately, the person that I would love to be on stage today to really deliver value to you guys couldn't make it because he's doing the right thing and taking his daughter around colleges and trying to find where she's going to go next year. It's the right thing. So, keeping us on the job. And I also wanted to talk, I brought this up because this is one of the first conferences in a long time that I've filled nearly half a pad with notes, and I've really appreciated the input, and I think it's been really exciting, and there's a lot of take backs for me, but there's also some notes we'll get to later if we keep talking.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Share.
So somebody was taking notes when you were saying capture your thoughts, so Paul gets an A grade right here. But before we get to HP, I really enjoyed the morning, and I was thinking about a few things to just set the context of HP and what Paul and I are going to speak about, which is, I think the question was asked to the room that if you were to go back in time and ask a younger version of yourself, what would that be? And I polled multiple tables and people said I would buy NVIDIA stock. Okay, so this is actually true statement. 80% of the people said I should have bought NVIDIA stock. So that's data point number one. Data point number two is that if you look at the top 10 companies in the world today by market cap, any guess on how many are tech companies out of 10? 7. I got a 7. The correct answer is 8. There's only Saudi Aramco and Berkshire Hathaway that are not tech companies. So that tells you the directionality of what's happening in the tech market. And this room feels it because you said you wanted to buy NVIDIA stock. And directionally, if you look at where NVIDIA is supposed to go in the next decade, the projection is anywhere between, it's at 3.5 trillion today, and it's supposed to be at 11 to 16 trillion. That's about a 15% growth rate. And by the way, that growth rate is dwarfed by what AI's growth rate is, which is about 35%. So if you even haircut that, NVIDIA and related stocks, which is a obviously a directional stock and shows where the market is going, is headed up and to the right. And I was observing the fact that this room feels it in them. So if you all feel that autonomous and AI is an eventuality in the job that we do, then the question I wanted to really explore with you was what's getting in the way? And the beauty of the answer is every company is unique, right? And every company has a different sort of set of constraints to get to the promised land. And the only way we'll all get there is by recognizing what the commonalities are and building towards that. And I think it was really phenomenal to have Palo Alto Network kick off the day. We heard the story from McDonald's, which was really amazing. A great iconic brand, distributed, global, and I think HP follows the same exact track.
Yeah, and it's true. We were in a discussion over coffee, and I agree that there are very different environments that Sedai are trying to tackle, and at the moment they're in a space where we're all unicorns, and occasionally some of us are fighting rainbows and some of us are not. But we're all running around in the field, and the problem that we have is, why haven't we adopted autonomous? And the reality is, first of all, to be very clear, despite the name, we're on the journey to software. So we're hiring people, and I was hired myself, and Roy was brought in as well as people that understood SaaS and understood platforms. And I was very excited on day one when I started, and I can tell you that as much as I'm terrified about speaking, day one, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I was so excited to start HP. Yeah. And terrified as well by the scale of it. And then I get on the inside and I discover that, everyone's human. And we were dealing with a lot of legacy, a lot of the challenges that Joel's been tackling, ownership of stuff. And really interesting in the last conversation, actually, something that I always like to point out. And one of the things I think, Gaurav, right, you'll remember, like the first meeting, when I did our team meeting, is I'm absolutely super keen about connecting our engineers to the business that they're in. For all these changes that we do, and the change I think this time is going to be tectonic, it will be immense, is we have to have the people that are contributing towards it to understand where their paycheck comes from. And it's very surprising. I've been at Staples, GNC, Glentel. Every time I've done this exercise, I did it with an order management system team. Mm-hmm. And the question was really around what happens when the credit card system stops accepting credit cards. Yeah. And their answer was, oh, we cut it off. And I'm like, we don't ask the business. No, we cut it off. So they didn't even engage the business to decide what happens when auth fails. So these are the things, and well, obviously in the flight system now, it's like for every single engineer needs to understand how they contribute towards the business. Yeah. And I think that goes back to the cost of goods as well. So an exercise that we're going through right now is having everyone understand COGS, and this is where the tools come in. Right. And we need the tools at the scale. Our spend is, in excess of 130 million with AWS granted across the company, but we have 3 different large divisions contributing into a single platform, trying to bring it together. And you can imagine 40 different business units deploying solutions right the way from endpoint applications through the cloud. And how do you keep a track on that?
So, Paul, can I actually, before we get into the detail, I just want to set the context just to give a sense to the room of the span of the product that you're building at HP, which is actually a brand new product. So as you well know, HP is obviously an iconic company. It's been around for 86 years, operates across 170 odd international regions, 58,000 employees, and thousands of customers. How many people in the room own an HP product? Keep your hands up if the product was a printer. Okay. So I guess the first question I have for you is, so HP's management, senior management down, decided that they had to get into the software business. And the reason for the software business is all the reason we know. It's high gross margin. It is highly scalable. It makes the hardware more sticky, which is the reason Apple does hardware end-to-end. And the product that they were building is what's called the Workforce Experience Platform, or WXP. So maybe a place to start would be to describe what that product is supposed to do. You're on top of 1,200 engineers, which has been dedicated to deliver the product. And if you could just describe the complexity of the infrastructure on top of which you have to build the product, and then we'll roll into other things.
Yeah, so in summary, the solution, guys, is if we think about, and there's been an awful lot of discussion on cost management. Cost management goes not just from hardware, but obviously to staffing and OpEx. And we're in a very difficult space. And, you know, a lot of infrastructure and IT teams are always cost restrained. They're, you know, because they represent the OpEx of the company. They're basically hitting the profit margin. So we will operate in a space called digital experience. It is not brand new. The space is relatively new. So we're not the first to market. What we are is the differentiator is that as a hardware provider, we are looking to provide digital experience across both PC, print, and collaboration. And it's all about optimizing that user, that person that you're hiring, one of your most expensive resources in the company, and making sure that that person is fully facilitated with every piece of equipment they need, and that equipment works not only to its optimum for that individual, that persona, but it also works across the devices. So if you need to print, if you need to join a meeting, etc.
Yep.
So that's where we're at. The complexity comes in many layers. First of all, we have 3 different hardware divisions that for many years have pulled against one another and done whatever they want to do. So bringing in the legacy software and the legacy telemetry and equipment, problem number 1. On top of that, obviously we have 3 different cloud solutions. So we do have a presence in all of them. One of our major pillars, the hybrid, for example, today lives in Azure. So trying to track across these clouds, track like to sort of bring the telemetry together and not
from the edge into the core. That's kind of the first challenge.
Yeah, correct.
And then you process it in the core.
Exactly. But monitoring all of our deployments that impact that core. So one of the recent uses with the tooling was on our hybrid solutions and how they were storing data. And we were able to realize enormous savings. So you can imagine that in a year, tough year, by the way, for everyone, I'm sure, but in a tough year where we're looking at potential cuts, we were able to make savings in our storage, in part using the tool set in order to negate some of those layoffs.
So I'm going on the assumption that everybody in this room is here in this conference, whether you're a customer or somebody that's interested in the topic, wants to understand the playbook to become successful, right? And I was kind of thinking through what I'd heard today. The things that get in the way, I don't think are technical. The technology has been solved, it's been hardened, is getting hardened more. So it comes down to a human trust deficit that was talked about, where one team may not know and understand what the VP of engineering or leadership, Fazil's trying to do with adopting autonomous. There might be siloed ownership. So there might be the other person across the room that doesn't understand the need for autonomous operations. Or it could be over-engineering. People think that, hey, we're good with APM, ABC, or telemetry, XYZ. We don't need autonomous, right? So there are a whole list of things that could get in the way. I'm kind of curious, what did you run into that was headwind? And how did you kind of Pac-Man your way out of it to today's solution, and what does the journey look like over the next couple of years?
I think it's important to understand that, first of all, we're still running into it.
Yeah.
And it is a journey. It's an evolution, not revolution. Although I will say that AI is potentially leaning on the side of revolution moving forwards. But as we go through it, I mean, we've been at every stage of this, but primarily, if I call anything out at all, there's 2 things. Number 1, coming back to understanding where your paycheck comes from, is also understanding and empathizing with your true end customer. So it comes back to product. So engineering working in lockstep with product and ensuring that both product and engineering understand the people and the personas you deliver to. So we're in a very tough space as well, and I talk about this a lot because I come from it and understand it, that if you work in e-commerce, the fact of the matter is we all shop. It doesn't matter whether you're a grocery shop or whether you're online on Amazon shopping, or like me, you can't stop looking at watches. It doesn't matter, you shop, right? But very few people work in IT services is a reality. Right. And even fewer of them actually care whether or not your PC is working. That's why when you pick up the phone when it's broken, nothing happens, right? Okay, so we're trying to build tools and we're trying to hire product managers for personas that are misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we faced, because the engineering issue, the over-engineering issue is real.
Right.
But when you can see it from the leadership point of view and you bring the platform together, you can bring legacy stuff together, and it's all about the customer experience. Our next challenge is going to be to build sticky. You talked about sticky. We're not there yet. So we are actually in the process of architecting that right now.
So I know you're from London originally. What team do you support?
I supported Chelsea before Marino.
Okay.
And then I thought Marino was pretty boring, by the way. But yeah.
And the reason I'm asking that question is because I want to tie this back to the previous panel in terms of team and hiring. So to really pull off hire wire, sort of act like this, which is taking a company which is HP, old school, culturally, to move it down the line of becoming autonomous, what team and hiring sort of skill sets do you look for? I'd love to get your view of the previous panel and how you hired for leadership underneath you.
I very much agree with the attitude concept completely. I tend to try to back that with way back in the old days, as old as I am now. We used to, it wasn't unusual when you started at a company to go into, for want of a better word, an analysis phase, and they would try to grade you as whether or not you're an initiator, a shaper, a completer, finisher. So basically, the team, and around me, I definitely try to build the team. So that's another thing that I add to it. I do think most of the capabilities nowadays, as long as you sort of done some training in your sector, can be taught, and inquisitive. So thinking outside the box is critical, guys. Can I do a little story?
Of course.
Okay, so as anyone,
we do have to get these guys to the bar in time. Remember, we made that promise to each other.
We do have to do that. Has anyone here heard of the term cargo cult? Okay, right. Okay, there you go. Yeah. So during World War II, as America was advancing on the Japanese islands, they required to make beachheads on the small islands as they come up to Japan. And they landed on an island full of natives that had never seen another person. So you can imagine this great big aircraft carrier turns up, thousands of soldiers. They set up a runway and they start bringing in all their supplies. And the natives were getting steaks, candy, and they were getting treated really well, except for the fact that the war ended. The US packed up, left, and went home. And I think it's about 40 years after the war, scientists observed the island because once again, no one was making contact. And what they observed was that the natives would make a runway, a ceremonial runway, and then pray for the gods to land. And it's very important because just noodle on that and take it away and think about it. It's on Wikipedia in much more detail and probably better than my memory is, right? But the really important thing is when you look around your teams, and this will happen even with your trusted people, they will be on the outside of the snow globe and try to replicate something. They will oversimplify and they won't really understand. And this is where systems, and especially big systems, fall over because they look on the outside and they see someone else doing it and they attempt to replicate. We've just fallen for this problem in recent months with our WXP. We've looked at competitors, we've copied features, but we completely missed the point of the feature because the product manager did not address the persona. They did not get to the root of the issue. What they really did was they just went and copied. And I think that if you take nothing else away, take it away and look around, and you can always coach it out of people, but it's really interesting to notice it. Just don't tell them that they're cargo cult and then you'll be all right.
That's a great story. I'll give folks a couple of minutes to think about the questions you want to ask Paul. The one thing that comes to mind is the notion of being bold at an individual level, which is the only way you can get, whether you're director, whether you're a VP, whether you're an individual contributor in the age of AI. because you kind of need to retool. As a VC, I have to retool myself because the way I used to look for deals or companies like Suresh's 10 years ago is not the way I do it now. So every function is retooling itself in the age of AI. And by the way, bold doesn't mean rash. Okay, it's a very, very important distinction, which means for your company, you have to be bold, but in the context of the business, making sure you take it from point A to point B and ultimately to nirvana, which would be what we're trying to do, which is take the menial jobs, give them to automation, and let the people do the best work, which is that top of the triangle that was talked about this morning.
Yeah, I'll add to that actually, because I was a wonderful CEO that I worked under at GNC so very recently, and we're always learning. I heard that earlier, and it's true. Be prepared to always learn. But I was always told, as you make a decision, the first thing you think of is, can you step back from it, or are you walking over a cliff? And that's the only difference. So as you make those decisions, and this is the be bold question, is like you can be bold even on a step over the cliff, but have a peek over and see how far down it is. Yeah. So that's definitely good advice.
Questions from the audience. Paul's got a wealth of experience, GNC, which obviously had some crazy transaction volume. Then he finds himself at HP, but go ahead, please.
This thing on? Can you hear me? Yep. So a couple things, right? And I like what you're talking about, hiring, the kind of people you want to attract, and it leads in from the previous panel discussion. But one of the things I've struck me was we talked a lot about empathy, curiosity, being innovative, things like that. As a person who's had to hire a number of engineers or promote engineers into director level positions, or recommend them for senior director level positions, one of the things that always struck me was this curiosity piece around, do you know why you're here? Right? Do you know what's your purpose? So when I'd say, and by the way, when I would interview someone, the technical vetting has already happened. By the time you get to me, somebody's already figured out, how to add, and how to subtract, and you know how to do all the skills, and you know how to do all that. So I would always ask a person questions like, why are you here? Like, what is it you hope to accomplish? Like, what do you want to get out of this? And asking the why. I'm taking a page out of Simon Sinek's book, start with why. To that. So when you think about at HP, and I would probably give this question to our previous panel as well, not necessarily on a technical track. I agree with everything they said. But when you're thinking about, okay, you're the VP of engineering and you want to hire a senior director or director, someone to lead a group of people that you want to be curious, what are you looking for? Like, what would you tell this audience is the thing that makes an engineer say, yep, that engineer is ready to lead engineers? Because I think everyone might agree, being the smartest engineer doesn't prepare you to lead a bunch of really smart people, right? They have a tendency to, check you. We call it pulling your punk card, right? So how do you do that? What do you look for?
I'll start by saying that I totally agree with you on the engineer to director thing. I've seen it many times. And the term I use is soccer players on tennis pitches. And we're in that process right now with one of our distinguished technologists. She's an architect and she is incredible. And the drive is to move her to a director role. So what I know is, to your point, is that she does a great job where she is, but when it comes to managing people, will that work? So we're in this transitionary period, and I will tell you, Joel, that one of the things I do is I have tough conversations with people, and I like to try and understand, are they really ready to let go of the reins? As an engineer, by the way, and when you're a super accomplished engineer, and I'm not saying I was super accomplished, but I enjoyed engineering. The most satisfying thing about engineering, and we talked about this the other night, I think with Benji, is that every day you write code or you do something or you do some task and you come away with a material feeling of value. I did this. I wrote this feature. I wrote the login service for P&I, for example. It was in action for 10 years. I did it. Satisfaction. When you move into leadership, you spend a lot of time thinking or sending emails. And where's the value? What have you done? And it's very difficult sometimes to understand that. So that's number one, is understanding whether or not they really have a hunger for that transition or they just want the money, which I fully understand. Don't get me wrong. I completely sympathize with it. The other side that I look at, and I look at from, I actually noted it down earlier because I wanted to talk about it. The term I use is I call it work without boundaries. So the teams that I run, I try to run very, very flat. Roy will tell you that when you've heard conversations with me introducing people in a meeting, for example, I always talk about the fact that I work alongside. Right? Okay, so you introduce this new way of terminology. So By introducing that and the fact that we as a team own things, I encourage people to go outside of their area and contribute in other areas. And I'm a firm believer, Joel, that the leaders lead before they become leaders. You can already see it. So internally within the company, that's not difficult. When you're bringing people in, I'm going to just tell you that when I interview people, I can tell it or I can't tell it. There's no magic sauce. Like I can just tell when I speak to people, do I trust them or don't I? Do I feel it? And I will tell you that leadership meetings when I'm interviewing can go for quite a long time as well. So there's that side of it, but no secret sauce other than my feeling.
So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And as someone who's from a large company, I was in a large company. We look at things a little bit different. You know, the old saying, you hire for skill set and fire for culture fit, all that works. But Tim, I'd be interested in your perspective as someone who evaluates the value of a company. And I know, I'm sure Suresh is the smartest person you've ever met. But when you look at a company, do you ever consider what leadership is, what's the depth of leadership? Because, you know, let's say Suresh wins the lottery tomorrow or something. But what do you look at? But it'd be interesting to get a sort of the VC perspective on when you look at leadership in a company. What do you look at? What says value to you? What shows our bench strength, if you will, that allows you to say, "Yep, that's the right company to buy"?
I think the question has to be looked at from the vantage point of what my business is, which is when I invest, it's literally like two guys in a garage, which is literally what Suresh was at with Benji in my office, and they just left, PayPal and hadn't. I don't think you guys are incorporated. Maybe you just had or something like that. So what I'm really testing for is a future state of the world that the entrepreneur feels deeply about, and there is nothing they would do other than that. Nothing. Right? And I test for that 6 ways from Sunday. I test for what they did before. I test for which other 3 ideas did you look at before you chose this one. How many customers have you talked to? I tested on, hey, if you build this and HP bought you for $50 million, would you be happy? Like, these are tests that shows the level of conviction for that problem. So what I try to talk about this is that, fallen, this is a line that, we use inside of Sierra, that the team has really fallen in love with the customer's pain and to solve it, not in the technology. We all talk about autonomous. Okay, great. But what does it do for the business? And that's what I really still remember, that Suresh gave me the story about, Sri Shivananda, who was a CTO of PayPal, was looking at the SRE count at 300. Okay, and he's like, this freaking line cannot go to 600 and 900. This is not the way to grow a business. You have to decouple the scale out with people hiring. And that's kind of how his project got funded. And, 5 years later, it's the same mission, right, that the team is on. Now, having said that, the team has to be curious and willing to take feedback, because many times, these guys came with an engineering background. They have to be taught the business side of things. So customer selling and servicing enterprise customers is a different kettle of fish, as we well know. And those are the skills that, they developed. Obviously, some, they've closed one of the largest banks, one of the largest security companies. This just shows you that the team learned on the job. And now we're at a stage with this $20 million raised where we can build the rest of the team and scale to meet enterprise demand. So it's the curiosity to know what you don't know and be willing to listen. That's kind of the second trait. But that's early stage. If you're doing B's and C's, that's a different skill set. Maybe I'll finish on the following thing. So is it the case, and maybe I don't want to put this to the room, but my sense is that every leader sitting in here is thinking about the golden path for their organization to get to that promised state, whatever that state might be, in this era of automation. And my sense is that's different for different companies. It's different for HP. It's probably different, certainly would be for McDonald's, and so on and so forth. And it's sort of incumbent on this community to come up with those set of golden pathways, right? Because I don't think it's a technical challenge. It's a process challenge to really turn the crank. So what I would really like to see. I want this room to be like double the number of heads next year, and maybe then we'll know we've really turned the corner as an industry. So I really encourage you all to, form subgroups. The company is here to help in any way that we can. We want to learn how we can templatize that journey, because I think it's in that process that the magic can get unlocked. That's at least my sense out of the day. But we're -4. I want to get you to the bar. So thank you, Paul, and thank you for the great day.